you about Dave's adventures, here's a little background information about him. Dave fits into a classical worldview, which means he talks about a whole bunch of different parts of philosophy. For example, he was known as a great economist, which means he talked about money and how it moves around. Dave was also a historian, which means he studied things that happened in the past. Dave was also a famous writer. He did all these things, as well as talked about all the schools of philosophy. The schools that he talked about the most were epistemology and logic. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Dave Hume. His name used to be Home, like the place that all of you young boys live in, but he changed it because he didn't know how to say it the right way. He lived in Scotland a really long time ago in the 1700s. He was born in 1711 and died in 1776. He went to school at the University of Edinburgh when he was 12, but most boys started that school when they were 14, so Dave was a real smarty pants. He studied law at the school, but he was always a philosopher at heart, which means he was a thinker. He thought about all kinds of things. Dave eventually left school to go to France, where he was a tutor at a school that was run by the Jesuits, which are the guys that run the school that we're in right now. When he was there, Dave spent most of his time writing a treatise of human nature, which was the first big book he wrote. It was all about how to ask questions all the time, which is called skepticism, how to use emotions, and how to make right choices, which is called ethics. He finished it when he was 26 years old. Even though people agree with what Dave said in the book now, people back then didn't like it, and they even called it stupid. Later in life, in 1744, Dave wanted to be the head teacher at the fancy University of Edinburgh, but he didn't get the job. The job was given to another guy because Dave was an atheist, which means that he didn't believe in God. In 1745, Dave began to write a book called A History of England, which took him until 1762 to get published. It had over 1 million words in it, and Dave was later charged with heresy as well, which means that he did something bad to the church. He was defended by the people who said that he didn't believe in their religion, so he didn't really do anything bad. It did cost him a job at another school, though, which was run by a Catholic church. Dave didn't like organized religion, and he spoke out against it all the time, especially the Church of Scotland. Dave's big idea about religion was that he couldn't say for sure if there was a God, but he said that he also didn't believe that there wasn't a God.
Now come the adventures of David Hume in his later life. There was once a boy named Jack Marius. Everyone called him Jack. Jack was fascinated with all sorts of animals and creatures, but most of all, Jack was interested in unicorns. He had heard stories of unicorns when he was just a wee little child, and he wanted to meet one more than anything in the world. One day, after school, Jack decided that he would actually go looking for a unicorn. Jack came up with a plan to ask everyone in town if they had seen any unicorns, or if they knew where to find one. Jack first went to his father, Mr. Tacthaeatrix, who were close by at the hardware store. He asked his father if he had ever seen a unicorn, but he said he had not. Jack then visited his friend Ibrahim. He had never seen one either. Jack finally walked down to the docks to ask Mr. McCringleberry, a fisherman and one of the oldest people in town, if he had ever seen one. The old man sadly told Jack that he also had not seen any unicorns around. Jack was feeling pretty bummed about not being able to find any unicorns, or even anyone who had ever seen one. He was finally making his way back home when he ran into a man he had never seen before. Jack apologized, and then, with what little hope he had left, quickly asked the man the same questions about unicorns that he had asked everyone else. The man gave the boy a puzzled look. He asked the boy if he had ever seen a unicorn, and Jack responded no. He then asked Jack if he had ever heard of anyone who had seen a unicorn, and Jack once again responded no. He then asked Jack why he believed unicorns existed if no one had ever seen one, and Jack said, "I don't know, I guess I just wish they were real." The man told Jack that there was no way that he could be sure that unicorns exist if no one had ever seen them. Jack understood this and thanked the man, and although he felt a little bit sad knowing that unicorns were not real, he was also happy that he had learned a way to tell exactly what's real and what's not. Jack thanked the man, who told him his name was David Hume, just as he left, and skipped home for supper. Long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there lived a great and smart man named Marcellus Wallace. He was a good citizen and always tried to do the right thing. In the city he lived in, there was a king. This king was not an awful person, but sometimes he made bad decisions. Sometimes these bad decisions also affected the people in the city, including Marcellus. Marcellus began to grow tired of the king making these bad decisions, and he began to feel like he should rebel against him. One day, David Hume came to see Mr. Wallace, as they were good friends. David told Marcellus that, even though the king made him angry, he should not upset the government by trying to change too many things too fast. David told Marcellus that, even though the government seemed bad, he may cause more harm than good if he tried to fight the king. David also told Marcellus that he should try to slowly change things, and also sometimes not do anything so that change could come on its own. David told him this because he knew that if Marcellus tried to start a fight with the king, things could end up far worse than they already were. Marcellus told David that he was just scared to stand up for himself and that he was scared of change. But David wasn't really scared. He was actually very smart. He knew that Marcellus might hurt himself and others if he started a fight with the king, and that after the fight was over, no one could be sure if the government would be better or worse. David told Marcellus that, even though he agreed that the king had too much power and that the people did not have enough freedom or a fair say in government, it was not the time to start a fight, because it would be too dangerous. Marcellus eventually agreed with David, as he was very convincing, and decided that he would wait for a better time to try to change the government so that he wouldn't get into too much trouble or hurt anyone.
There once was a king, a very smart king. This king was so smart that one day he decided from now on he was only going to be controlled and motivated by reason. Reason is understanding things in common sense. On that day, he stopped letting his feelings affect his decisions. That same day, another king, a very mean king, attacked the smart king and tried to take over his land. The smart king went to his window and watched as the mean king's men attacked his land, which made him very angry. He told his general to attack and push the invaders out immediately without even thinking. The smart king saved his land, but he also realized that he did not use reason to do it. He used his passion and emotions. This confused him, so he went to talk to an even smarter man named David Hume. David told the smart king that men cannot be motivated by only reason because it is not strong enough. He told the king that desire, passion, and emotion are what mainly drive people to art, and to ignore these things would not be good. Looks like an art. David also explained the two ways that people experience the world. First, through impressions, which are strong, direct sensations and emotions, and also through ideas, which are copies of impressions in your mind. The king, being very smart, no longer tried to act only on reason and embraced his emotions and passions so that he could be a better king. One day, on the lazy lake, a fisherman named Ash Ketchum sat on his boat. Ash was in a bad mood because he had been sitting out with his old rod all day and hadn't even gotten a nibble. Suddenly, a wild Magikarp appeared. Ash looked at the Magikarp and said, "What an ugly fish." The Magikarp splashed, but it had no effect. The Magikarp then said, "Hey, I'm not ugly. It's all about taste. Not how I taste, but the standard of taste." Ash looked at the fish, confused, and asked what the standard of taste was. "Well," said the Magikarp, "the standard of taste means that even though people think certain things are beautiful and others aren't, and all of these people see beauty in different ways, there are certain standards that almost everybody agrees with. These are standards of taste. Ash thought that sounded silly and was obviously still confused. Ash asked the fish how he could tell what met these standards. The Magikarp responded, "There are 2 tests. The first is the test of time. If something like a piece of art is popular for a long time, then people must think it is beautiful to keep talking about it for so long." Ash understood this, but he didn't want to wait a couple of centuries to tell if the Magikarp was really ugly or not. "And then there is the second method," said the Magikarp. "This method has 5 steps. 1. Start with the right equipment. A delicate imagination. 2. Practice makes perfect. And so the more times you use this, the easier it will get. 3. Take several looks. You could always miss something the first time. 4. Compare the thing with others like it. If I'm not the only fish in the sea. 5. Free your mind from prejudice. Try to think fairly and only focus on the Magikarp, and only on the thing you're judging." Ash took a second and looked at the Magikarp, and it wasn't so ugly after all. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the Magikarp disappeared as Ash heard a thick Scottish voice yell, "Magikarp, return."
Once upon a time, there was a young boy named Jeff. Every day, Jeff would watch as a man would walk by his house in the afternoon, pick up a stone, and skip it across the pond. Jeffy watched every day. One day, Jeffy called out to his mother and told her, "Watch, this man will walk by, pick up a stone, skip it, and keep walking." His mother watched, and sure enough, the man walked by, skipped a stone, and kept walking. Jeffy was so proud of himself for figuring out this man's routine. He bragged to all of his friends about how he could see the future. One day, Jeffy's father took the day off from work. Jeffy was excited to show his new discovery to his father. Jeffy dragged him outside, and they both sat down in front of the pond to watch. Jeffy told his father about his prediction. Sure enough, the man showed up again and skipped a stone and then walked away. Jeffy said, "Every day, that man will come and skip a stone on the pond." "Isn't that cool, Dad?" Jeffy's father responded, "Son, that does not mean he always will." Jeffy tried to tell his father, "Soon enough, the day will come when the man doesn't walk by, and you will understand what I'm trying to say." The next day, Jeffy watched for the man while playing on his swings. He waited and waited, but the man never showed up. Jeffy then understood his father's lesson, that just because something has been a certain way in the past doesn't mean it will always be that way. Joe was an angel in heaven. He worked at the Angel Cafe on Cloud Street. Joe's boss was a guy named God. Although Joe had never seen him, one day Joe was working at the counter when a woman angel strolled in. She sat down and ordered a coffee, and Joe started talking to her. "So you hear of this God fellow that runs everything here?" asked Joe. The woman said she had heard of him, but never seen him, and that she believed he was real. They continued talking, and Joe found out her name was Joan of Arc. The next day, a man angel came into the inn late at night and ordered a coffee, and Joe started talking to him and asked the same question that he had asked Joan. The angel replied, "You know what? I used to think he was not real, but now that I'm up here, I guess I'm wrong." Joe laughed, and they kept talking. He discovered that the angel's name was Nicodemus. Nicodemus.
The next day, another angel came into the cafe and sat down. This man talked a bit strange and was wearing a skirt, even though he was a boy. Joe asked him the same question that he had asked the last two customers. So you hear of this God fella who runs everything? The angel answered, I never was sure if God was real, but I always believed that someone or something could be in charge of it all. I prefer to worry about what I can really see and feel though. Joe thought about this and talked to the man for a while, until he had to close the cafe for the night. Joe asked the man's name, and he replied, David Hume. There you go. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.